presentations from Lorenz Ray, and we're going to have from Xueying. Sorry for my pronunciation if I didn't pronounce very correctly. And then from Divya Jain. So we're going to have 3 presentations, and then we also have the time for questions and answers from the speakers and from the audience. We're going to start in the next 7 minutes. Okay, at 7:15 a.m. It's 7:15 a.m. in Paris. Okay, and the speakers will have about 20 minutes to make their presentations, and then we will have 10 minutes for questions and answers approximately. Okay, and then we're going to end the session at 9 o'clock. Okay, so we'll wait for the speakers. The first speaker is here already, Lorenz Ray, right?
You have a different order than
the session host. Please, can you help us to enable the share screen option? And I would like Mr. Lorenz and the other speakers to try to share their screen first. I mean, now, try to share your screen now, and let's be sure everything works perfectly. Okay, before we commence the session in the next 5 to 7 minutes. Okay. Mr. Lorenz, please, can you try to do that now so that we're sure that everything works perfectly?
Is it working now?
Yes, I can see your screen. It's working. So that's perfect. That's perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay. So what about who else is on there already?
No,
okay,
we
so
are just 3 people. Yes, we'll wait for the rest, I think, yes.
So, Mr. Lorenz, where are you now? Where are you making this presentation from?
I'm currently in Tokyo right now.
Ah, and what is the time?
It's 2:10.
Ah, okay, so you are in the afternoon.
Yeah. How about you? Yes. Where are you coming from?
In Paris now.
You're the same. Both of you are in Paris? I would have wanted
so
to
it's
go
just
there.
7 a.m. 7:10 a.m. So.
It's different. It changes.
But it's quite early. It's quite early there right now. Like,
yeah. But it's okay. So, and I do hope we have a nice session together. And so far, I hope you are enjoying the conference.
Yeah. I attended the talks last night, like last night Japan time.
Okay.
Yeah, they were good. I wanted the talk. I enjoyed the talk by the one from the UC Berkeley.
Okay.
Yeah, where he talked about the Kenya and Ghana.
That was very cool.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that was very, very cool. I enjoyed it very much too. And it's very disappointing what he said, but at the same time, it is it is what it is, and it means that we have to keep going further and see what's best.
Yeah, it's kind of counterintuitive, really.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
I'll just get some. I'll return it in a short while.
Okay, that's okay.
So, Whale?
Yes.
I have a different order than you for the presenters. To go.
Okay.
I don't know
so what is the order you have?
I don't know if yours is the official order or mine. Anyways, you are the moderator, so you decide.
Okay.
But on the program of the conference, I have first Divya Jain.
Okay.
On the effects of climate change on electricity demand in India. Then I have Lorenz Ray.
Okay.
Understanding impacts of power interruptions.
Okay.
And then I have Xueying Liu on the diffusion of direct current technology.
Okay. Okay.
I don't know. I mean, you decide because you already told Ray, Lorenz Ray. Yeah, but I just wanted to let you know that this is what I have.
I am fine with either. No worries. You can change the sequence. Just let me know.
Hello, Divya.
Hi, hi.
Hello, Divya. Good morning.
Hi,
Oh,
good morning.
good morning. I guess you are joining us from India, right?
Yeah, I'm from India.
Oh, okay, okay. So what's the time over there?
It's 10:45.
Oh, okay. So
10:45 a.m.
okay, okay. So that's nice.
Yeah.
It's just 7 a.m. here in Paris. Please, can you try to share your screen? Can you try to
Yeah,
share
just a second.
just
Yeah.
to be sure everything works fine? Okay.
It's not in presenter mode yet. Can you try the presenter mode?
Sorry, I didn't get you.
I cannot see the presenter mode yet. I don't know if that's only me, but I think, yeah, I cannot see the presenter mode. Can we try something else? So
I didn't get you. Like, what do you mean by presenter mode?
that it's the full screen.
Okay, you can't see the full slides, like the slideshow.
Yeah, I don't see the slideshow. We see the small screen.
Just a second.
Okay.
Now can you see it?
I can see our full screen here. Okay, I can.
No.
You can't?
No, I can't. I mean, we can see it, but we cannot see it full screen. We can't see small screen.
What about others?
What about others? What can you see?
Yes, I can
yeah.
actually see a full screen, and I think, yeah, for me, it's okay. What I can see, it's okay.
What I can see is the PowerPoint application.
Yes, yes, that's what I can see also.
The slides and yeah.
Yes, it's
But
not in full screen though.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not in full screen, right? So since we are waiting still for some people, I guess we can try, right, to put it correctly, no?
Yeah, okay. I'm just trying on my part.
So Divya, what you want to do is that you put shared screen. Share screen, sorry, and then instead of choosing, so you're gonna you're gonna open first the PowerPoint presentation on your computer, and
okay,
then
the full screen mode, right?
No, that's not it. Wait, I'm gonna.
I just stop sharing the slides and then do it again.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. I think.
Since we still have time, it's still okay that
No,
we
actually, we don't have much time left. It's already 7:16 a.m. and I think we should start now. Okay.
Okay. But we are waiting for somebody, no?
Right. Well, in the meantime, while we are waiting for the other people to join us and to save our time, and to be sure we're able to finish on time, I think we should now start with the presentation of Lorenz Ray. Please, let's have your presentation, please, while the other people will join us in the course of your presentation. Okay.
Okay.
So thank you. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. Someone else is still sharing their screen. So can you please unshare whoever?
Yeah, just a second.
Yeah.
So wasn't my presentation supposed to take first? Like at the sequence wise?
Yes, but what I have here is the presentation of Lorenz Ray first, okay? So after him, you are going to...
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So mine is the last one or the second one?
The second. No, the third, please. The third presentation. In
Third,
any
okay.
case, if Mr. Liu is not able to join us on time for his presentation, then you make your presentation next.
Okay, okay, okay.
Okay, so Mr. Lorenz Ray, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, I can see your
Okay.
screen.
Okay, so again, thank you very much for this opportunity. I am Lorenz Ray Payonga from the University of Tokyo, and I am going to present to you this afternoon my research together with my professor, Dr. Tomohiko Ihara of the University of Tokyo, on understanding the impacts of power interruptions on quality of life, opportunities for socially optimal policy, and demand-side resilience. So it has been a common topic of conversation here at the IAEE conference, the catastrophic Texas blackouts. But we have to remember that these large blackouts are not new to the world, especially in the recent history. We've had a lot of similarly catastrophic blackouts happening in different parts of the world due to different causes, ranging from environmental causes, animals, grid instability, cyber attack, and random accidents. However, what we fail to recognize is that power interruptions has been actually a part and always a possibility in our lives since we adopted electricity, in our day-to-day lives. In fact, when I looked at the report of the World Bank of the Doing Business Report 2020, I estimated that that in 2019 alone, 48 billion hours of human time were lost due to power interruptions. And according to Bird and Matthew Mann, all of these interruptions, the small, the large, these are dress rehearsals for the future in which they will appear with greater frequency and severity. Power interruptions affect us in different ways. They affect infrastructure and public services, industrial, commercial, and agricultural firms, and us, residential consumers. What is unique about residential consumers is that the effects of power interruptions for us are not only tangible effects, not only economic effects, but they are both tangible and intangible. And since we are living in a society, impacts of power interruptions in all these segments result to diminished quality of life, which is defined as the multidimensional quality or character of living conditions. Economists and researchers have looked at the impacts of power interruptions and tried to quantify them. And these segments are the ones that I presented earlier: infrastructure and public services, firms, and residential or private individuals. It was somehow easier to quantify the impacts on the first two segments because the impacts are mostly tangible. Thus, the approach is usually done directly by accounting. However, for residents and private individuals, there is some difficulty there because the impacts on us as ordinary individuals are mostly intangible. Thus, an indirect approach is called for. Now, impacts on power interruptions are evaluated using two major techniques. The first one is by the use of the cost per unit of unserved energy. This is more commonly known as the value of lost load, like the currency per kilowatt hour or per kilowatt. And the other one, which is cost per unit time, is used for measuring damage in a certain period, like dollar per hour or dollar per year, and usually known as damage cost or customer interruption cost. Now, going back to the residential or private individual segment, there are actually literature that talk about impacts on them. And these literature are usually descriptive on the side of the impacts. And then on the quantitative side, we have the socioeconomic indicators or valuation, usually again in terms of damage cost and value of lost load. However, we do not know yet Like, how do the descriptive impacts pan out in relation to the quantitative value? So there is this black box in between. How do these impacts contribute to the valuation, and by how much? And in fact, researchers like Becker and Morrissey say that this is a black box. So aside from being black box models, criticisms include there's no standard methodology, the lack in international comparability, and these numbers could be potentially speculative or hypothetical. And most of the studies done in this respect are done in Europe. Therefore, in our study, we wanted to map and quantify the impacts of power interruptions on quality of life to make sense of these valuations. So why do we want to study this? The first one is that knowing these impacts can lead to socially optimal electric utility investment and operations. The other one is that it may lead to inclusive energy policy and regulations. And lastly, if all things work well, this can lead to an enhanced quality of life. So we did that by first looking at the power interruption impacts, the raw impacts. And then we just performed existing methods like contingent valuation, damage function, and damage estimation to get the number or the value of lost load, damage cost. But then the new thing in this research is that we are proposing a power interruption impact assessment model, which is divided into two major components. The first one is the impact categories. Essentially, we are breaking down the impacts into certain common categories that are affected by the lack of electricity, and the impacts on life roles, or like how do power interruptions affect how we perform our lives. So as you will see soon, this is a combination of some behavioral sciences and economics. So where did we get the inspiration on this from? We were inspired by the life cycle impact assessment method or framework, which is commonly used in environmental science or environmental impact assessment. The way it works is that life cycle impact assessment, the professionals select the impact categories to which flows or substances or chemicals are classified and then characterized or calculated how much they affect certain areas of protection. And to make it clear, essentially what we're doing is just we are tracing the flow from the raw impacts into certain things or roles in our lives that we value. That's why this kind of modeling or the approach in life cycle impact assessment, this is also called an endpoint modeling or damage modeling. But without going further into detail about life cycle impact assessment, essentially, life cycle impact assessment has a generic framework in which we characterize impacts in terms of, first one, proportion and duration of the flow or substances. And then the second one is based on the sensitivity of the receiving environment. And the third one is the effects of exposure on targets for the impact category. Analogously, now we go to our power interruption impact assessment model. Analogously, we identified that the impacts of power interruptions can be driven by these three factors. The first one is based on the frequency and duration of interruptions, which we call the interruption index. And then the second one is based on electricity dependence of people. And the third one is based on how these impacts affect their life roles or the performance of their life roles. So the way we went about this is that we started by analyzing the power interruption data in our study area. And then we performed a preliminary online survey and literature review to predict the impact categories in this model. And we then validated these predictions by using a questionnaire survey, both field and online. Then we proceeded to damage estimation using already known techniques. And we tried to explain them using the power interruption impact assessment model. Now let's go to our study area. So we went to the province of Albay in the Philippines. The province of Albay in the Philippines is known to have the third highest frequency of interruptions in the country and has the highest number of momentary interruptions. These are interruptions that are less than 5 minutes in the country as well. It has more than 1 million people and around 200,000 households subscribing to electricity. In this province, people experience approximately, on average, 15 times of power interruptions monthly that aggregate to around 13 hours on a month. So now, in this questionnaire survey, I will describe to you soon how we were able to get the factors that we mentioned earlier. So in terms of the frequency and duration of interruptions, we just got the data from the electric utility. For the electricity dependence, we asked our respondents to fill up a life role time use inventory describing how they spend their daily lives. That is, we used the concept developed by Neville and Super in their work in the late 1980s called the salience inventory, which said that we people perform different life roles in our lives. And the most common are family and household, leisure, studying, work, community, and community. And then I added personal care to account for those that, sleep and rest. So instead of asking the respondents to fill out this time use inventory with their detailed activities, we asked them to use the life roles instead. And then we asked them to fill up a similar time use schedule by putting their self-reported electricity dependence. So that is for the electricity dependence. For the impact salience, we asked them to list down the impacts of power interruptions that they can remember and rate how each impact affects their performance of their particular life role. Now, we go to how we did the valuation. Essentially, we just followed existing methods. So we asked them, we presented them a hypothetical device that can free them of the power interruptions in 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 1 hour, 4 hours, and 8 hours by the use of a bidding game, elicitation method, and payment cards. So in the field survey, we had 151 respondents. And in the validation online survey, we had 207 respondents. Now, for the damage estimation, in terms of analysis, we obtained the median value for interruption duration using Bishop and Heberlein's log logistic probability model, which is consistent with the random utility model, which assumes commingling of stochastic and deterministic components of WTP and is considered to be the suitable for the prediction of behavior and evaluation of welfare. And then from this, we developed the damage function specified to the psychophysical power law, which is a general law describing quantitatively the relationships between human sensations as well as other subjective impressions and the physical stimuli that evoke them. And then from this, we estimated the total damage. So essentially, that is the number. And then we described using the impact assessment model that I described in detail to you earlier. Now let's go to the results. So the output of our model has 3 main components: the impact categories, the impact on life roles, and the socioeconomic valuation. As you can see, the most affected impact categories are health and comfort and household management. What are these? These are the health and comfort include discomfort due to hot temperature, cannot sleep well, getting sick. Household management includes not being able to do household chores needing electrical equipment or appliances, food spoilage, difficulty of caring for household members, especially the vulnerable. And this is mostly linked to duration. Since we did the study before the pandemic, we assume that much of the work and livelihood and ICT access and data security impacts have now shifted from offices to homes. So in terms of impact categories, the highest affected are home and family, followed by occupation, and followed by personal care. In terms of socioeconomic valuation, it is worth noting that the value of lost load computed is at around 20 pesos per kilowatt hour, which is twice the electricity rate people are paying for. Now, we thought maybe we could break this down in different parts of day, since we got the time use inventory anyway. So from 12 to 6 a.m., the most salient expectedly is the personal care, because this is a time people are mostly asleep. And the value of lost load is a little bit above the average or the general model. And from 6 a.m. to 12 p.m., this is the time when the value of lost load was the lowest. Usually workday begins at 8 a.m. and the interruptions in the study area during this time are mostly long, the scheduled ones. And probably this is also the time when people are not so dependent on electricity, at least at home. And then the workday usually ends at 5 p.m. So we see a shift from in the 12 noon to 6 p.m. time, and the value of lost load is increasing again above the general model. And finally, this is very good to see, from 6 p.m. to 12 a.m., the value of lost load computed is 4 times the electricity rate, or twice the general model. This is the peak of household activity and leisure. And the power interruptions in that area are mostly short at this time. Now, we computed how much does the quality of life damage play in the bigger picture. So the method for the estimated power interruption costs here, as you can see on the screen, are based on GDP calculations. So we did not describe it in detail in this presentation, but just to give you an idea, it plays approximately 10% of the residential segment impact. So to summarize, quality of life impacts are mostly linked to duration and heat-related effects. Well, this might be because of our setting as a tropical country, might be different in other areas. Interruptions at different parts of day affect people differently, and effects on quality of life are more salient at night than during the day. This might have changed though during the pandemic. High value is placed on the home and family life role than work or occupation. This may also be a cultural thing. As an effect of the pandemic, almost all the impact categories are already situated within homes. Now, in terms of policy implications, how can we use the power interruption impact assessment model? We can take a look first at the impact categories. From the impact categories, it is imperative that healthcare—
Okay, Mr. Lorenz, you have 5 more minutes. Please.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of impact categories, we saw that the health and comfort related impacts are are the most affected. Thus, healthcare facilities prioritization is very important. And then at home, from the side of adaptation, there has to be provisions for ventilation and hydration. And on a larger scale, this requires a lot of cooperation from the private and the public sector. It is important that water and electricity supplied are decoupled from one another, because during power interruptions, people need to be hydrated. If we look at the relative importance and vulnerabilities that are described in the model, it is important also that, or it could be that budgeting or allocation of resources should be maybe based on the revealed relative importance of impact categories and electricity dependent life roles. And then the use of value of lost load and damage cost estimates for cost benefit analysis and resource allocation among consumer groups may also be helpful. On the side of the temporal variations, as we have observed, hopefully this can help electric utilities to consider their operational decisions based on time-dependent consumer behavior. And if I may add, during the course of my fieldwork and through the studies that we have reviewed, usually electric utility operations are more like based on the technical sides. This is the most important technically, and then we implement a power interruption at certain times. But then if we want to reduce impacts, taking into account how it affects people will be very helpful, at least in reducing the impacts on them. So for further study, the model can be used for evaluating performance of electric utilities, in a more comprehensive view. And then researchers can also deep dive on particular impact categories and or life roles. As you might have seen, the life roles and the impact categories are still very aggregated. So there can be further investigation among them. And then lastly, the use of this model was tailored for the electric utility, but then applicability for water utilities, internet, transportation may also be performed, may also be explored using this model. And finally, I would thank our stakeholders for this, making this research possible, and especially the additional support from the Environment Research and Technology Development Fund of the Environment Restoration and Conservation Agency of Japan. So that's it from me this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lorenz. Thanks for this very interesting presentation. I enjoyed listening to your presentation, and I hope the other people that have joined us for this conference this morning, they also enjoyed your presentation. So I will leave the floor open now to the other people that have joined us this morning. Anybody with any questions, this is the time you can ask Mr. Lorenz the questions. Any questions?
So far, I don't see any questions on the
okay. So let
chat,
me.
but I have one. If
okay,
you
please
mind.
do. Please ask your question.
Okay. Okay. Actually, I don't have only one, but I will start by one. So thank you very much. It was super interesting, and
okay. So please make it short, please. You have a minute.
So basically, my question is. First of all, are blackouts planned? Because in a sense, your study would, if blackouts are planned, then people have time to adjust, let's say, their behavior. So maybe instead of taking healthcare into consideration in the morning, they would take healthcare into consideration in another time of the day. So yeah, I wanted to know that.
Yeah. So thank you for your question. Blackouts, some of them are planned, some of them are not. And it also depends on the reliability or the facilities, the infrastructure that are present in some places. In more matured infrastructure, blackouts are often like, the more common kind of power interruptions are planned because they see the warning signs early on, etc. But in some places where the infrastructure are aging and the management is still not very that high level, then there will be a lot of chance that power interruptions will not be planned. And from my study area, if I remember correctly, around 70% to 80% of power interruptions are not planned. So they will have differences. They will have differences in impact. It's also worth noting that what happened in Texas, they were also able to give some forewarning to people.
Okay, 30 seconds more, please wrap up.
Yeah. So but yeah, that's my answer to that.
Okay, so thanks a lot. So again, I enjoyed your presentation. You've developed a model on power interruption impact assessment, and you have also applied the model to a case study in the Philippines. Now, I will just like to ask briefly, maybe you have tried to compare the results from your model, because there are other power interruption models, all over. So I don't know if the results from your model, you have tried to compare it to some other models and to see how your model compares to others. Have you?
Okay.
Do you have
Yeah.
anything to say on
Yeah.
that?
Thank you, Will. So far, we have not seen a model similar to this. The models that we have seen are like the VOLL models, the damage cost models, which were explained using demographics. So like regression analysis based on location, based on duration of interruptions, or like age, etc. But in terms of connecting the raw impacts to the valuation, we have not seen that. So in that respect, we were not able to compare because we had nothing to compare to. On another respect, in terms of value of lost load, we actually did not yet, or did not on purpose probably, compare the actual value, because we are aware that there will be geographic or demographic differences depending on the area that you do the study on. So literature has explained that usually the VOLL values from country to country or from place to place may not be directly comparable, but we can actually do that also, and by regression and all these things. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions? Okay, thanks a lot. Let's move on to the next speaker. Please.
Thank you.
Jane, please, can we have your presentation? Sorry, when to have next Mr. Liu. Xueying Liu, sorry for my pronunciation. Please, are you ready for your presentation?
Yes, sorry. I thought you meant someone else. Sorry about that.
Oh, sorry for my pronunciation
No worries.
of your name. Okay, please, can we have your presentation now? So to speak on diffusion of direct current technology in private households in Germany.
Yes, yes.
Okay. The floor is yours.
Do I share my screen or do I just start?
Yes, please, you have to share your screen.
Okay.
Thank you. You have 20 minutes to make your presentation.
Okay. Just a second.
The host, please, can you help us point her in the right direction?
Xueying,
Yeah.
So do you see down at the bottom, share screen? Have you done this before?
Yes. But
you have done this before, okay.
Yeah, I have some technical problems with my computer. Just a second.
Okay. Worst case scenario.
Okay, so to save our time, while you try to fix the technical problem, you can chat with the. Okay, so you already started sharing the screen. Okay. Okay, so hello. Hello. Please, I will want you to be relaxed when you make your presentation. Okay. So maybe we have the next speaker, if that is okay by you, so that you can be well relaxed before you make your presentation. Is that okay by you? Or you're ready to go?
Can you see my screen? Because I think I am sharing my screen and I
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay, so now is everything's fine now.
Yes.
Okay.
So you're ready to make your presentation?
Yes.
Okay, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. Today, I would like to present a study on direct current technology in private household in Germany. So first, I would have a brief introduction talking about direct current technology. And then this would be followed by the aim and scope of our study. Afterwards, I have a brief introduction on literature and our original contribution, and then our main part on methodology and data. And finally, I present our results, policy implication, and some limitation and conclusions. So this will be a forthcoming working paper at our institute, FCN. So this is Future Energy Consumer Needs and Behavior at E.ON Energy Research Center at RWTH Aachen University. So for more details, you could refer to that paper. So there are certain benefits related to DC technologies in buildings. So as listed here, so we adapted from the study by Mascianini and John from 2018. So these benefits include improved energy efficiency because of less conversion steps, more flexible and simple design. Again, also simple design because of less conversions, reliability of systems, lower installation costs, improved safety, and lower capital cost. However, since DC has been around since a very long time, ever since the start between Thomas Edison and Tesla on whether we should use AC and DC, and we are talking about DC again now, while the dominant design is AC, because there are certain driving technologies that either use DC or are generating DC current. So these are as following the solar PV systems, which generates a direct current. On the consumption side, we have EV, electronic vehicles, consumer electronics, heating, ventilation, aircon, LED charging, and computing. So computers and servers, they all run essentially on DC power. And because sometimes our household run on AC power, so this AC power is actually converted to DC first to drive these machines. And also on the storage side, for battery storage, they also actually convert AC power from AC to DC for their use. So we see that there are certain benefits associated with DC, and then there are a rising number of applications for DC. Because of that, we want to study DC technologies, and our research question is more specifically, how does the following parameter affect the saving potential of DC configuration compared to AC configuration in private household? And the following, the parameters refer to the following. The first is the percentage of AC and DC load. That is to say, we want to ask whether with increasing DC load, the saving, it becomes more. Second part is household characteristics, thirdly, the size of solar PV and battery. Fourth, the amount of feed-in tariff and electricity price, because we want to convert the amount of energy saving to the monetary value. And then lastly, we want to simulate P2P trading communities. And once we simulate, well, we simulated the above and have the results, we ask ourselves, what are some of the policy implications? For our study, the scope is confined to Germany. So this would have the implications for PV generation because of weather data, for household profiles as we generated based on German household, for electricity price and feed-in tariff, because obviously this would be the German price and tariff, and also the legal framework that's governing the P2P trading policies. We also confine our scope to residential household. That means commercial and industrial applications are excluded. It's not saying that they are not important, but we just start with household first, and we would like to examine these areas in further studies. Lastly, we focus on saving from improved energy efficiency. That is, as we mentioned, there are certain other benefits such as improved reliability or lower investment costs. We do not include them here in our study specifically, although we do have a look at literatures on these parameters. But for our own study, we focus on the savings that comes from the improved energy efficiency. There are certain existing literatures as shown here. However, we find that these literatures mainly focus on the US context. And also the results are rather generalized with a fixed price and setup. So they did not really ask the questions of like, what are these, how would these parameters affect the savings? They also give relatively few policy implications because many studies mainly focus on the technical aspects. And lastly, they did not include P2P trading because it's a rather new framework, especially in Germany. So therefore, our study have the following original contributions. So first, we focused on monetary savings from improved energy efficiency. Also, we apply it to German household. Thirdly, we include a specific household type and characteristics. We also include P2P trading models based on the German legal framework of direct Lieferung. I don't know if any of you speak German, but that's like a specific German framework. We really focus on our analysis on the different scenarios and try to generate some policy implications. So now we come to the methodology part. So for this part, we first have two separate modules. First, we simulate household characteristics. This would be based on size and type. So size would be how many people live in this household, whether it's a kid, and type include their employment situation, such as whether they are working or stay at home or retired, and their daily activities. These are randomized by the system. So we also, parallel to the load profile simulation, we also did efficiency calculation based on different configurations of the household, whether it's AC, DC, or DC with P2P trading. I'll talk about this a bit more later on. So once we have the efficiency and load profiles, these are the two main input data. We configure our program based on some parameters. So these parameters will be the PV and battery size, electricity price, and whether we have a P2P framework. And then once we have all the above input data, we put it through an algorithm that try to maximize self-consumption from PV generation, and obviously also the battery storage that is charged with PV. The reason to do that is because in Germany, the electricity price is much, much higher than the feed-in tariff. So to minimize your electricity bill or to maximize your gain or profit from a PV, you want to maximize self-consumption. Once we pass through this algorithm, we have our results, which shows how much savings you gain from different configurations and different scenarios. From there, we can do savings analysis and compare it with equivalent AC system or a system without PV and battery. And once we have this analysis, we can derive some policy implications. Now we come to our data part. For the load profiles, we simulated 600 households in Germany based on household size and employment situations. For the DC, AC and DC configurations, we use the following. We designed the following. So we see that in the AC configurations, there are more conversion steps, and that the efficiency is generally lower. And whereas if we look at the DC configurations, the conversion from DC to AC generally happen at before the grid, and then there are fewer conversion steps within a household. For price levels, we use for current price levels, we use the data from German federal government website. For investment cost and for future prices, we gather from literature or based on the legal framework. For P2P community setup, we adapted from the method shown by Zepter et al. From 2019 and assume best case scenarios. The best case scenario means you sell all your electricity in the community and you get all your electricity from the community, because the P2P price is usually, when you sell it, it's better than feed-in tariff, and when you buy it, it's cheaper than the electricity price you get from the grid. Now we come to our results, simulation results and policy implications. So the first question we ask is, how much does the share of AC versus DC load affect our savings? So here we see on the horizontal axis is the share of DC load, and the vertical axis the amount of annual savings for each household type, the mean annual savings. So we see here that the load type, whether it's AC or DC, actually does not significantly influence energy efficiency. We see that a slight increase in savings, but it's very slight. And therefore, we think that the policymakers should focus on generation and storage technologies, such as solar PV and home batteries, because this would be the main bulk of savings. We also find that the cost savings alone from the improved efficiency are significant, but rather small. So rather insufficient to incentivize the adoption of DC technology configurations, because we see that they range from around 50 euro per year to 90 or 100 euro per year. So this compared to the annual electricity bill is rather small. So therefore, because of this rather small saving of small magnitude, there's a need to achieve and advertise lower investment costs in order to make DC configuration more attractive for adoption. So now we look at household characteristics and how that impacts savings. We see that, and we actually explore a little bit about household characteristics and savings, and we found that this diagram best represents our result. So here we see that annual load is highly correlated with annual cost savings, and household other characteristics actually do not play an important role apart from the total amount of annual load. So here we see that consumers with high load generally have higher savings, and therefore policies that are promoting DC technologies should really target and focus on consumers with high load, and definitely consider residential buildings with higher types, such as multifamily homes, or more generally, just end users that have higher load. We also postulate that the diffusion of electric vehicles would facilitate diffusion of DC because of the increased load. Here we see that here we ask ourselves the question: how does PV and battery size have influenced the annual savings? The savings is so our result is presented on the top two diagrams, and the bottom two diagrams are for explanation purpose. So the top two diagrams on the left shows the current price level, and on the right it shows future price levels. And the diagrams is basically on the vertical axis it shows the PV size, and horizontal axis it shows the battery size. And generally the lighter the color, the more the savings. So for example, on the left top figure we see that the savings is maximized at around 90 euro with a PV size of 2.5 kilowatt peak and a battery size of 10 kilowatt hours. So from these two diagrams, we say that savings from DC actually do not necessarily increase with a higher PV size or battery storage size. And although on our diagrams it appears that the best combination for savings would be at 2.5 for PV and 10 for a battery, this is not necessarily true also. So if we look at the top right figure with future price, we see that when PV is at 5 kilowatt peak, the savings is maximized with a battery of also 5 kilowatt hours. So actually there is a certain optimum combination, and it's not that linear increasing with or is not fixed at any point. And so this is rather peculiar, and we dig in deeper into it to see why this is the case. So on the bottom two figures, you can see that actually the system, the overall system savings or cost increase with PV and battery size. So these are again just the annual electricity bill excluding investment cost. So we see that with a bigger PV and the bigger battery, the annual electricity bill or the amount of money you actually get increases. So we see that with size 10 for both PV and battery, you are actually paid 250 euros a year. So that's the money you get, and you don't need to pay any electricity bill. With that, compared to when you don't have any PV and battery, you need to pay around 1,200 euros a year in electricity bill. Also similar with AC prices. So the larger the PV and battery, the more you save. And because the net savings from a DC configuration is the difference between these two systems, it has the interaction from these two systems actually cause this peculiar pattern. Because when you have a bigger PV and battery, the savings from both AC and DC actually increases. And therefore, the end result of the net saving due to DC configuration is not necessarily higher. So now we come to our penultimate scenarios. So this would be the amount of feed-in tariff and electricity price. So here, as expected, we see that the higher the feed-in tariff and higher the electricity price, the more the amount of savings. Because with a DC configuration, generally it's more efficient, and therefore you save more electricity. And if this electricity means higher monetary values, then of course overall you gain more. So here we see that higher feed-in tariff, higher prices, more savings from the system. And therefore we think that because in Germany there is a gradual reduction of the feed-in tariffs, therefore this could make it
okay. Ms. Liu, you have about 5 minutes to wrap up.
Thank you. So here we see that with DC configurations, with the reduction in feed-in tariff, the DC configurations can become less attractive. Our last scenarios, we show that the peer-to-peer trading and how that compared to a scenario without peer-to-peer trading or without any solar and PV. Here we see that peer-to-peer trading generally increased cost savings. And this is because the higher feed-in tariff, so the higher electricity price that you sell your electricity for outweigh the effect of the lower electricity price that you pay. As we said before, that the higher both prices, when both prices are higher, you save more. But here, one price increases, the other decreases, and that the increase in feed-in tariffs to the community actually outweigh the other effect. And we see that the lower diagrams represent the savings compared to a system, as AC system without battery and PV. So we see here that the savings is rather, it's again significant, but rather small. And also, so based on this study, based on these scenarios, we think that the DC household pilot programs should be designed to allow potential P2P tradings to increase savings. And also DC configurations could become more attractive and diffuse more when P2P trading is more widely accepted. Now we come to some limitations and conclusions. So obviously with our studies, there are certain limitations. First is that we use simulated data rather than actual data for load profile and also PV and battery size. So this could have this may not represent the reality as well as actual data. So electric vehicles is not included directly. However, we do see that with increased load, savings would increase. So this will be the case with electric vehicles as well. So investment cost is not is taken from literature and not studied directly. Our scope is limited to private household, and we assume best case scenarios of P2P tradings. In conclusion, we find that the improved efficiency do result in savings about 90 euro per year, which is significant but small. Therefore, there's need to reduce investment costs to make DC configuration more attractive. The share of DC load actually does not impact savings significantly. Therefore, the focus should on generation and storage. Also, the household load profile does not impact savings significantly, and the main character is the total load. Moreover, the cost savings do not necessarily increase with PV and battery size. And lastly, the P2P trading do increase cost savings. That would be our studies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Liu, for this very interesting presentation. I really enjoyed listening to your presentation. I would like to open the floor now to the other listeners. If anybody has any question to ask Ms. Liu. Okay, so while we wait for that, let me set the ball rolling. So first, I have some questions to ask you. Okay, you've talked about the savings potentials, from this conversion from, AC load to DC load. But my first question will be, what will it actually cost to implement the changes you're talking about here? Because we need to now look at the overall cost savings. First, from the cost, what will it cost to implement? Have you taken that into account, and what will it cost to implement these changes you're talking about?
Yeah, that's a very good question. As I mentioned, one of the limitations of our study is that we look at, say, annual savings rather than investment cost. And we gather that from literature. Actually, in the literature for retrofit, that would be, the literature generally says it's prohibitively high to make it economical. That would be, I think, in terms of about $16,000 US for the US context for retrofitting, which is not economical compared to the annual savings as shown here. For a new building, it is still in debate. So there are some literatures that shows that if you build a new and with once DC configurations, DC appliances and grid becomes commercially available, it would actually be cheaper than an AC household. So in that case, there is no specific cost numbers, but it's generally around 10% cheaper compared to an AC household in terms of just the configuration, the cable, the wiring, the converters, and all these things. But there are also studies that shows that it would be around 50% higher in terms of investment cost. Just for the amount of wiring and everything. I think the reason there is no specific number is because depending on your house size or building size, obviously the cost changes, and therefore they have the percentage compared to the AC system. So in conclusion, I would say for retrofitting, the investment cost is so high. For one family home, around $16,000 US, and in that case, it's not economical. And for new buildings, there is still in debate, and there is a potential that it's actually cheaper than an AC configuration. Yes.
Okay, so I will I will assume that, okay, so one of the takeaway from your work now is that we should rather focus on new buildings, right?
Yes.
If we want to achieve the cost savings, right?
Yes, yeah. And
rather
also,
than trying to retrofit because because of the cost implication of retrofitting, right?
Yes.
So my follow-on question is, you talked about P2P trading.
Yeah.
Now, P2P trading increases the cost savings as one of the findings from your research.
Yes.
Now, you do also consider the cost implication of setting up P2P trading platforms, the coordination of the platforms, the aggregation of the people, you know, that will participate in the platform, because P2P trading also comes with its own costs. Okay, so is that also factored in, or how do we balance that, you know, with respect to your work?
So these are not factored in the savings because we compare it with an AC system. So this cost would be the same. You would still have the platform cost, the coordination cost, if you trade within an AC system. And the German framework for B2B trading actually require that you use your private network, and so you can't use the public grid, which means even if you trade within an AC system, you need to build your grid infrastructure within the community anew. Therefore, in terms of cost, the DC system will be equivalent to an AC system. And when we try to look at the net savings, the difference between the two systems, we do not consider the setup cost.
Okay, so that is not included in your model. Okay, so any other questions? Do we have anybody with any other questions for Ms. Liu before we continue? Okay, the session host has a question for you. Okay, so yeah.
Yes, a small clarification question. Do you consider heterogeneous households in your simulations?
Yes, so we have different household types. So we have different household types. So based on how many people live in this household, whether it's like adults or kids, what is their employment situations, such as like retired, working, or stay at home. And also because based on these different types, we have about 12 different household types. And within each type, we also randomize the activities. So that would be heterogeneous, yes.
Okay, so thank you very much for your presentation once again, and thanks for your responses to the questions.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the next speaker, Ms. Jain. Okay, I hope I pronounced your name very well. Please, let's have your presentation.
Yeah.
The floor is yours.
Do you have some problems? No, it's fine.
Yeah, just a second.
Great. Please let me know if you need some help out of the technical side.
Okay, I can see your screen now. Okay, so it's okay now.
Perfect.
All right, all right. So
Just a second, are you able to see my video?
Now we can see the presentation.
Yes.
We cannot see the presentation now.
Okay, so now we
can see it now.
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay, just my question is, like, you can see my presentation as well as my webcam on, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. So today I'll be presenting my paper, which is on the effects of climate change on electricity demand in India. So this is based on the case of 3 different climate zones which prevail in India. This is the work which is co-authored with my PhD supervisor, Dr. Gopal K. Sarangi, and also my co-supervisor, Dr. Sukanya. So let me just first start with the outline of what the presentation would look like. So first I'll be touching upon the background of the paper, then the data variables and the sources from which they have been taken. Then I'll be moving on to the methodology, basically the empirical part which I have used in the paper. Then moving to the results and discussion part, and finally, what conclusions do I derive from the study and the implications or the policy implications of the study. So just if we look at the background of the study. So first of all, if many of you would not know, India is a 5th most vulnerable country to climate change after Japan, Philippines, Germany, and Madagascar. Why is this? This is because of the fact that it is very vulnerable to extreme heat, and a lot of issues of environmental justice are prevailing in India, and also its dependence on agriculture, which make it a vulnerable country to climate change. So if we talk about climate change, first thing which comes to our mind is the increase in surface temperatures or the increase in sea temperatures. So what we have witnessed is during the past 2 decades, there has been an enormous rise in the temperature in India, which is close to 0.23 degrees Celsius, and all the more like in the very past decade, it has been 0.35 degrees Celsius, which has been the highest. Also, the estimates which are provided by the World Bank, it can be seen that the average temperature in India, it will rise by 4 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. Due to climate change, India loses approximately $37 billion, which is close to 0.36% of its GDP. So all this pertains to why is India very vulnerable? Also because of the fact that it is characterized by tropical climate conditions, mainly by the tropical climate conditions. Although there are a lot of different states which are characterized by their different climate features. This is because of the fact that India also witnesses more than 300 CDDs, or the cooling degree days, they are known as the cooling degree days over the year. Now, what do these CDDs mean? I'll talk about it in the next slides. So global warming, which is as a result of rise in temperature, although it affects a lot of sectors such as agriculture, then tourism, healthcare, etc. But energy sector is the most prominent in India, which is affected by the climate change, and it also contributes to the climate change. So why does it contribute to climate change? As we all know that because of the burning of fossil fuels, this results in the rise in emissions, and in the energy sector in India actually contributes to 70% of the greenhouse gas emissions in India. So this part, which relates to energy sector contributing to climate change, has been touched by a lot of researchers across the globe as well as in India. But we are actually forgetting the part, and the research has been scant in this part, that climate change itself, it impacts the energy sector. So if we just bifurcate it into 2 parts, so for the first part, we can see that climate change impacts supply, such as the renewable sources, such as hydropower and solar power, because of the changes in precipitation and solar radiation, etc., which impact these 2 generation sources. Then the other part is looking at the demand side. So basically, if you want to just understand how climate change impacts the demand, so climate change factors such as temperature, humidity, as well as a lot of other factors, they impact the demand due to the difference in heating and cooling needs by the different sectors of consumers in India as well as across the globe. So as I talked before, the impact of climate change on demand. So if we just look at one factor, which is temperature. So looking at the graph, which you can see in the slide. So when the temperatures are low, for example, in the left portion of the graph, the consumption is higher. So basically, this portion is it prevails in the regions in which the climate is very colder. But if we actually increase the temperature, the consumption in these regions, it actually decreases. And after a certain point, which is actually the threshold point, so the consumption increases. So if I want to just summarize this whole graph, So the rightward portion is it relates to the consumption of energy in summers, and the leftward portion is the consumption of energy in winters. So what I was talking about, the threshold point, this is the point at which there will be no demand for heating and cooling, and this is a comfort temperature which is defined when we look at the temperature and consumption graph. So the literature actually takes 18 degrees Celsius as a traditional value for calculating the heating degree days and cooling degree days. But we'll be deriving like how have we taken the threshold temperature. It's not the same as 18 degrees Celsius, which has been taken in previous literature. Now, just after touching upon the background, I'd like to highlight that what are the questions which I'm trying to address in my study. So first question, it relates to the role of climate factors in influencing the electricity demand in different climate zones. So I'll be talking about the climate zones in the next part. Then what is the nature of the non-linear relationship which you had seen in the previous part about between the consumption and temperature across the different states. Then third part, I'll be looking at the demand for heating and cooling across the different states in different seasons, basically summers and winters. So the scope of my study is confined to 3 climate zones, although the classification is based on 5 climate zones. So I've taken the 3 climate zones as they comprise of the states with large population sizes, and basically they cover most of the India's geography. Now, the representative states from the 3 climate zones, they have been taken, two states have been taken from each climate zone. This is because of the fact that these states are the 6 energy intensive states of India, as well as they actually contribute to 45% of total energy consumption in India. These are the estimates which were provided in 2019 and 20. Now, going by the characteristics of the 3 zones, I'll just talk briefly about what are the characteristics of the three zones. So for the hot and dry climate zone, we experience high temperature along with a lower humidity and less rainfall. For the warm humid climate zones, which we experience temperature is moderately high, but the rainfall and humidity is also very high. And in the composite climate zones, we experience higher temperatures in summers as well as extremely lower temperatures during winters. So this is a data which I've taken for my study. So for the left-hand side variable, which is the outcome variable, I've taken the daily average electricity consumption. This is the aggregate electricity consumption from all the sectors taken from the source, which is POSOCO. Then for the right-hand side variables, which are the climate and non-climate variables, for the climate factors, have taken the data from IMD graded data set as well as QTMCO website. Then for the non-climatic factors, these are the yearly figures which are provided by the Census of India and MOSPI for population and income. But the yearly figures, in order to match it with the daily resolution data, I have linearly interpolated both these parameters, the non-climatic parameters, that is population and per capita income. So now moving on to the descriptive statistics of the study. So basically, these are the parameters which highlight the different states. How do they differ across the different parameters? Like what are the characteristics which actually distinguish these different states? So I'll be talking about what are the implications of the different parameters when I move on to the main analysis. So now starting with the methodology of how I've combined it in the main analysis. So looking at the methodology, I've taken 2 methods. One is the linear method or the parametric method, and second I've taken non-linear method or the non-parametric method. So why I've compared the 2 methods is because of the fact that most of the early literature, it actually relies on the application of the linear method. But the major problem with the linear method, which I've also mentioned, the second part is that it actually relies on the functional form is derived beforehand. And if we derive the functional form beforehand, we also have to assume the threshold temperature beforehand. It's not that the threshold temperature will be derived from the data itself, but we have to pick a value beforehand. So that's the main drawback of the linear or the parametric method. That's why we have chosen to compare both the methods. So for the linear method, I've taken the piecewise linear regression model, which divides the data into piecewise linear functions. And for the non-parametric method, I've taken multivariate adaptive regression splines method, which is a non-parametric approach. And this actually helps us to derive that non-linear association that I was talking before, without assuming any functional form. So basically, we didn't have to assume any threshold temperature beforehand, but the threshold temperature is derived from the data itself. So the whole data region is divided into splines, and we are fitting it with the piecewise linear splines as before. Just the difference is that in this the threshold temperature is actually derived from the data itself, and we are not assuming any functional form. So digging on deeper to what the modeling framework looks like. So for the left-hand side, which is the linear regression model part, we have, as I told before, we have used a piecewise linear regression model. So rather than using the daily daily electricity consumption, I have transformed it into per capita consumption in order to remove the population trend which could exist over the years. And for the response variables, I have taken trend parameters, then also the climatic and non-climatic factors. For the climatic factors, the main, which is the daily average temperature. The threshold temperature, which I was actually talking about before, that we need to set it before. So I've chosen that based on I've tested it across the different regression equations. So the threshold temperature, which was maximizing the goodness of fit in those equations, that was set, and also using the visualization of the graph. So based on this, the HDD and CDD parameters have been derived. And we have used the dynamic patterns. Also, we can actually guess that the lag of these parameters, which are the temperature derived indicators, they can have an impact on consumption, as the temperature or humidity, which is higher on the previous day, it can have an impact on the consumption on the very next day. And also the non-climatic factors have been taken, such as the per capita income. Apart from this, I've taken the dummies for monthly and daily seasonality, as well as the dummies for the different major holidays and minor holidays during the year. Now, the right-hand side part, which is a non-linear regression model. So for this, the response variable is the same as was taken in the linear model, but the predictors have been reduced a bit in order to reduce the complexity of the model as it pertains to high-dimensional data. So what does this March model or the multivariate adaptive regression splines model does is, in the forward pass, it actually selects all the basis functions, or what I was talking before, the piecewise linear functions. And then in the backward pass, it just selects those basis functions which actually result in a lower residual sum of squares in the final model. So this is how the mathematical formulation of the two models look like. So for the piecewise linear regression model, I've actually told like what all variables I've taken. But for the multivariate adaptive regression splines model, so this is the mathematical formulation of the model. The right-hand side, which is the BFIX. So basically, this is just one-dimensional basis functions, but there will obviously be a combination of a lot of basis functions if we combine, if we take a huge set of data together. And the last part, it actually shows the hinge functions, or like how the threshold point is defined in this method. So this is how the method actually derives the threshold point, which is C, or the naught. Now moving on to the results part. So if we compare the results from both the models. So for the first model, which is a linear model, that is model 1, we could see that for a few of the parameters, the relationship which we could expect between climate factors and consumption, it's actually the opposite. If we look at the relative humidity factor, which you can see in the fourth column, so for that, especially for the warm and humid climate zones, we actually expect that they would be a larger, like the positive impact of humidity, like larger the humidity, larger would be consumption. But we could see that there is a negative sign which is showing over here. And then also in this model, we could see that although the adjusted R square is fairly higher, but if we look at the last column, which talks about the accuracy of the model, that's close to 0.1, which is higher as compared to what we could see in the next model. So I'll just show what were the results from the next model. So here the accuracy of the model was fairly high as it's close to 0.05, which is lower than 0.01. So these are the model equations for the splines model. So I'll just talk in the next slide that what these equations, like what are the main conclusions that can be seen from these equations. So I'll just go one by one for each state and for each climate zones, like how do this magnitude of impact it varies. So if we first look at Uttar Pradesh and Punjab, which belong to a composite climate zone in which there are extreme temperatures during summers as well as extreme lower temperatures during winters. So for Uttar Pradesh, we could see that the sensitiveness towards summer temperatures or the rise in cooling demand has been higher as compared to the rise in heating demand during winters. But a striking result which we could see for Punjab is, although we could expect that at lower temperatures the heating demand would be higher, but what we expect is that there has been a fall in heating demand in Punjab. This can be due to the rise in winter temperatures in Punjab. Then for Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu, which belong to a tropical climate zone, so for these two climate zones, although like generally we could expect the cooling demand is higher, which is fairly seen in for these two states, but also humidity parameters, they actually they contribute to to a change in consumption across these two states. And also like for Tamil Nadu, we could actually see that humidity actually results in rise in consumption, more rise in consumption as compared to what we could see because of the rise in temperature. Then the last two states which belong to hot and dry climate zone, for also for these two states, the cooling demand is obviously higher due to the rise in temperature. But if we compare the fall in heating demand with the rise in cooling demand, we could see that the fall in heating demand surpasses the rise in cooling demand for these two states. So this is the main result which actually distinguishes between all the states in the different climate zones. Now, this is the graphical representation of what we derived from the magnitude of impact which I was talking before. So, for the first four graphs which you can see, so the rightward portion, which is the rise in cooling demand, is very steep across all the states. But in the last portion, you can actually see, as was shown in the impact in the degree of impact, that if we just look at temperature and consumption, then in the lower part of the left-hand part, the falling part of the curve is actually very prominent. Although the rising part in case of Rajasthan is also higher, but that's just because of some of the outliers. But if you could see for Madhya Pradesh, the left-hand side is much more visible or much more fitted as compared to the right-hand side. So we could see that the falling heating demand is higher than the rising cooling demand for these two states. Now, moving on to what we expect for the different states, the results in different seasons. So, for the states in first four parts, for the four states which belong to composite and tropical climate zones, for these two states, the consumption or the load has been higher in summers and monsoons respectively. But for the last part, which I was talking before, also in the hot and dry climate zone, for these two states, the consumption has been fairly been higher in winters as well. This can be possibly due to the electricity load from agriculture, which is also very high in these two states. This might have resulted in higher consumption during winter season. Now, now just discussing upon the main part of the whole study. So what we could derive from the study is that there are different climate zones in India which are actually behaving differently, or their responsiveness towards change in temperature, the demand responsiveness towards change in temperature is very different across the states. That's because the rise in cooling demand, we could see that is there in all the states. So this results in rise in air conditioning load. And then humidity parameter is also a prominent factor that explains the electricity consumption in warm and humid climate zone states. This is a relatively new finding. And then states with a hot and dry climate also experience a larger percentage fall in heating as compared to rise in cooling. Then finally, if we look at all the states, although we could see that for one state, which is Uttar Pradesh, there has been a rise in heating demand in winters. But for all other states, we could see that there has been a fall in heating demand due to the rise in temperature. This can be a result of global warming, where the rise in temperature has resulted in fall in heating demand across these states. Now, just concluding with what the findings actually tell. So the findings from our studies, it can be of use to a lot of power companies or the electricity demand companies, which are trying to manage the load. So basically, if they're not able to guess that there has been a falling heating demand during winters, as well as a rise in cooling demand, and what is the degree of that rise, then they'll not be able to maintain the electricity supply. The electricity supply management will be very it will not be possible very accurately. And so the findings will help in attaining what will be the additional generation capacity which will be required by them. Then also the policy makers, they can actually use the results to suggest more demand side management measures such as energy efficient schemes in order to use the air conditioners and the heaters and geysers in winters more efficiently. And also this can be used to actually guess what is the actually derive what are the seasonal demand in the different states. Then the findings from the study, the findings which are basically the method which was the non-parametric method, it's very different from what has been used in the earlier study. So this method also can be used to derive the results for the states in other countries with a similar climate features. Thank you. Open to your comments and suggestions. I hope I'll be able to address that.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jain, for your very interesting presentation. So I would like to leave the floor open for our listeners to ask questions. Please, who has any question for Ms. Jain? Any questions? Okay, so I would like to start with my first question. Now, you talked about the characteristics of the climate zones, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know if you can explain to us further so that we actually understand the distinguishing characteristics of these three climate zones, you know, that you mentioned, and how that directly impacts the issue of climate change. So can you clarify that to us so that we fully understand the context of your work?
Okay.
So just to guide, you mentioned, for example, hot and dry climate zone, and you mentioned some other ones that you were pretty fast, you know, when you mentioned this area. So I just want you to go a little deeper to give us a clearer understanding of how these different climate zones, you know, because we know India is a very big country, right, with over 1 billion people. So how these three different climate zones, how they actually impact, you know, the issue of climate change.
Okay, sure. Yeah, sure. So going by sorry for being in a hurry when I was explaining the climate zones. But if I just want to talk about the climate zones, how do they differ and how are they actually impacting the demand across the different zones. So first, if I go by composite climate zone. So in the composite climate zones, the states which comprise of composite climate zones are a few of them, and I've taken Uttar Pradesh and Punjab. So I've taken these two states because they are the ones which are actually contributing to a higher consumption as compared to other states. So what is the characteristic of the composite climate zone is that we experience really higher temperatures during summers as well as really lower temperatures during winters. So these two states, they actually experience extreme temperatures during winters as well as summers. So what does this impact the demand side is that that if we just take Uttar Pradesh, then we can see that because of the higher temperatures during summers, there has been a fairly like a relatively higher rise in cooling demand. But because of the lower temperatures during winters, there has been a fall in heating demand. But if we compare both of them, then we can see that the cooling demand has been higher as compared to the rise in heating demand. So that is there for Uttar Pradesh, that is in composite climate zone. Then for the other state, which is Punjab, so in this state, we can see that although we could expect that the results would be similar as was in the case of UP, that is Uttar Pradesh, but the results have been very different, because although the rising cooling demand is actually the same, which like the behavior is actually the same which was there in UP. But instead of the rising cooling demand, rising heating demand during winters, there has been a fall in heating demand. So this is suggestive of that the winter temperatures have been rising in the state of Punjab, which has resulted in a fall in heating demand in this state. Now moving on to the next zone, which is the tropical climate zone. So in this zone, what we can experience is that during the whole year, the temperature is not that high, it's like moderately high, but it's in the combination with a higher humidity and higher rainfall. This has an impact, fairly a larger impact on demand. So apart from the rise in cooling demand in these two states, we can actually see that humidity factor has actually contributed to a lot of variation in demand across these two states in the tropical climate zones. So these are the characteristics of these two climate zones which actually have an impact on demand. Then for the third part, which is the hot and dry climate zone. So in this zone, although this zone is actually characterized by higher temperature, but with the lower humidity as well as a lower rainfall. So what we can expect is that maybe because of the because the because of the because this zone has a lower is actually dry and has a lower rainfall, that can be a result of the basically a higher demand, a higher heating demand at the start, but maybe due to the rise in temperatures which have taken over the time, that's why the fall in heating demand is actually surpassing the rise in heating demand in this zone for the two states which are Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh. So this is how I have come to the final analysis for the three climate zones.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah. So my second question will be, so let's say for policymakers that are interested in your work, right? So in these climate zones, considering the relationship between the temperature rise and the cooling demand that you have worked on, so what would you recommend, as a quick response, for policymakers, I mean, in terms of decisions to take in order to address some of these issues and mitigate some of the impact of climate change in India in these different zones?
Okay. So basically, like for the policymakers, since in this study I've also derived the threshold temperature or the reference temperature at which which is actually the comfort temperature at which there will be no demand for heating and cooling. So what they actually can do, that there can be some measures through which above this threshold temperature, like this can be set as a temperature above which the consumers basically can try to reduce the demand, and also this can result in energy savings for the consumers. And also, as I was talking about, the energy efficient schemes which can take in place. So, for example, in case of India, if I know, like under Energy Conservation Act 2001, so there was a standards and labeling scheme which was there in India. So for that, this is a scheme for different products. So for example, for air conditioners, in case of my study, or in case of geysers, they have some labels which can help actually the consumers in order to save their power and also reduce their electricity bills. So similar schemes can also be encouraged in order to reduce the consumption from the inside of the consumers. Yeah, so this is basically the implication which I can see.
Thank you very much. So I will once again now leave the floor to our other listeners, if anybody has any question now for Ms. J. Okay, the host, yes, you can have the floor.
Yes, thank you. I was wondering, you in the GDP, you take the full GDP of the entire region, let's say, but wouldn't it make more sense if you take the GDP per sector, in the sense that there are some sectors that are more energy intensive than others, to explain energy intensity in a sense?
Yeah, actually, yeah. What you're saying is actually correct. But in order to actually because of the fact that my outcome variable has been an aggregate of all the sectors, that's why I took the GDP of the whole of the state together, rather than taking the from the different sectors like differently. I'll try to inculcate it in the analysis that I'll be doing further.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. Any other questions for Ms. Jain? Okay, so I would like to go back to Ms. Liu. Can you hear me, please? And I just want to ask her some questions. Hello, are you there, Ms. Liu?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so I would like to ask you again, you said from your work, you can see a savings of 50 to 90 euros per year, right? And you said that depends on the size of the PV and then the battery and all that. So what would be the maximum limit for these savings to be possible? And is there no way these savings can be increased?
You're referring to the maximum savings that we simulated in our study?
Yes. The savings from your simulation. You were talking about that when we have 10 kilowatt hour of battery and 2.5 kilowatt of solar PV, that is when we have the highest savings, if I understood you correctly.
Yes. That's the average across our household.
Okay, so if we go beyond this range, let's say you have a large household, and so what would be the impact of that on the savings?
So in our simulations, we find the maximum saving is about 160 euro per year, but that's really because the load is the load size is very high, and for that we use the optimum PV and battery size adjusted to the load. So we didn't use the optimum PV and battery combination to maximize savings. We just use the PV and battery combination that is tailored to this load from literature, and then that results in 160 euro savings per year.
Okay. All right. And for Mr. Lorenz, please, are you there? I have a question for you.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. So in terms of the model you've developed, the power interruption impact assessment model that you've developed and presented in your work, and you've applied it to a country. So I was just wondering in terms of replicability, right? Mm-hmm. The adaptation of your framework, of your model to other countries, Have you tried to see how that could work in other countries, or what are you doing about that? Or is that actually possible, or is it only based for your case study?
Yeah, actually that was what we were trying to address, because the VOLL and the damage cost models may be influenced by culture and a lot of these demographic factors. So essentially, if it will be used in other countries, the impact categories may even be different. But we are giving, the method is giving the surveyor, the researcher, the freedom to identify the impact categories in their own areas. So like, for example, if in the Philippines, health and comfort comes first, it may not be the case, say, for Canada or like any Northern Hemisphere countries. So yeah, it gives flexibility that may be applied to other countries in that case.
Okay, then that comes to the next issue on the weighing, on the weighing of the impact categories, okay? So with that So there will has to also be flexibility in that, right? If so what I understand from what you're saying is it has to be adapted to the particular environment. Okay, so that brings in a lot of subjectivity, right, into the model. Okay, so let's say I want to apply it, for example, in France now. Then I have to understand the environment in France, understand the different conditions, and then try to apply the framework. Then that introduces a lot of subjectivity, based on what the researchers think and all that. So how do you address this in the overall picture of your framework?
Yeah, well,
because it then becomes very subjective.
Yeah, thank you. So, well, the first thing is we actually do not expect the weights to be directly comparable from country to country. It's more like if we are studying an area of similar cultures, of similar values, then probably it can be as valid. But in terms of comparing, say from country to country using the same model, for example, then the basis of comparison may not be the value of lost load or the damage cost, but more like the relative values. Like, for example, if I compare, for example, in France, say, for example, the first thing that comes is work and livelihood, then we can take it as it is. That the people, for example, in France are more vulnerable on that aspect. Meanwhile, if you put it, for example, in Japan, then maybe another thing comes up. And then it just makes it easier for us to see the relative importances or the relative vulnerabilities that people place on different aspects of their lives. Now, if we look at the monetary value, that is where the variations due to demographics will come in, I think.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, please, for Mr. Lorenz or Ms. Liu or Ms. Jain? We have about 6 more minutes to wrap up this session. Okay, yes, the floor is yours. Our host.
Yes, if I may, this question is for Mr. Lorenz. Well, first of all, do you consider or do you take into account the fact that there might be people having their own power sources, like in these blackouts in your study? And the second one would be, I understand that your study is before pandemics. So how do you shed light of your study in a pandemic situation at the moment, in which work at home becomes more important, let's say?
Okay, thank you. So the first one, actually, this is the results that I showed is part of a larger survey. And in the survey that we did, we also took into account the people with their own power supplies. Unfortunately, we only have out of more than 100 something, we only had 10 people who have their own power supplies. So it was not that significant. So we wouldn't see the effects. But yeah, if they have their own power supplies, then they will not experience the interruptions, assuming, right? And then for the second question, I think the results can actually give a peek on what's happening at home when everything has already shifted to the home, right? And it means that there is a commingling right now of the life roles of family and occupation anymore. So I think it is worth looking into, although we haven't really talked about it yet. But it's worth looking into, do people actually even distinguish between work impacts and family impacts in the pandemic? So these are questions actually that may spring from the results of our study.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other contributions or comments for any of our presenters? Okay, so I would like to thank to thank everyone that has joined the session this morning. I do hope we all enjoyed the session. And for the speakers, if you later have any other questions, you can reach out to them and ask your questions or clarifications. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining the session this morning. From Japan, from India, from France here, and from all other places. So once again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. And thanks a lot for the nice presentation. And have a nice day. And bye for now. So, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.